the working class rising up. This is the ruling class punching down.
My day, bigger your day.
First rule of gladiator school, bro. Don't punch down.
Charging into a goblin's Hail Trump!
The threat from outside forces is far less sinister, dangerous, and grave than the threat from within.
Control your own body.
We will root out the communists, Marxists, fascists, and the radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country.
We can fight the entire grinding system. Nobody can. But together, everybody can.
I did nothing wrong.
Hello and welcome to Did Nothing Wrong Live, the show that cuts through the noise and helps you make sense of the chaotic information space around us. I'm Griff Somke. With me today is Karl Folk. Jay McKenzie is in the undisclosed location. In today's episode, we discuss America's self-inflicted economic crisis, as well as Elon's lame attempt to use the king of AstroTurf to accuse his critics of astroturfing, and the concept of a diversity of tactics and how that applies to the current situation. Thanks again for your support. Keep listening to learn more, and remember to smash those like and subscribe buttons, kind of like the world's confidence in U.S. Treasury bonds. So the fallout from the crazy continues. Trump really went through with it and slapped an eye-watering array of tariffs on the world, and the results were entirely predictable. The stock market crashed. The base rate went up on U.S. Treasury bills, and the reason why that's bad is because that's the rate that the U.S. government has to pay to borrow money.
Yes.
Every other economic crisis we've had, the money comes out of the stock market. It ends up in T-bills because they have generally been thought of as a safe harbor in economic uncertainty. And that is demonstrably not the case anymore. Generally, the rate goes down in these circumstances, not up. And the fact that it's going up means that the world is losing confidence in America on a very fundamental level.
Yeah.
And this is going to end up leading to a really nasty recession.
Yeah. I mean, this is the thing that we've, this is one of those big concern things, right? And it sure appears that the world may be starting the process of moving away from the dollar as the reserve currency.
Right.
And, I think there's a good argument to be had that may have been a goal in certain ways, even if it was never actually articulated that way of this movement, right? Because ultimately the goal is to isolate and to dominate.
Right.
And, I think a lot of people, myself included, would also go so far as to say this has been something that's been bandied about by a lot of the people in Trump's orbit for a long time in an effort to control things further.
Right.
And, if the rest of the world has any sense, I think they are looking at this and saying the instability, the threats, the actual thing that they're trying to do, reforming economics as a mechanism to control politics. I mean, I would be backing away from the dollar as well.
Yeah. You can't trust these people.
No.
They have proven that they are going to do crazy stuff from one day to the next. That there's no such thing as actual policy that anyone can see. It's like, what did the guy say on Truth Social when he woke up this morning? Well, I guess that's United States economic policy for the day,
right,
or for the hour.
Well, and it's it's also it's the vindictive as hell part too, where it's just wanting to see things burn. But ultimately, it seems that the plan is to have no plan beyond white power shit and really just terror.
Yeah.
And I think everyone needs to remember that authoritarians like Trump and the people around him thrive on fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and they've done it. Like this is the truest form of uncertainty you can have for a macro level system.
Absolutely. And the more uncertainty they can have, the less likely it is that people keep paying attention. I think that's their theory, is that they are trying to get people to the point where they are just cowed. They are stuck in their own little existence, and they're like, you know what? I'm going to do what the Democratic leadership is doing and just put my head down and try to survive the next 4 years.
Yeah. I mean,
Maybe
that's
they'll
just
screw
it.
it up in the midterms when it's becoming more and more clear that these people simply aren't planning on midterms.
That's
Ain't gonna
just
last
it.
that long, guys.
That's just it, right? Like, I think people need to really get out of the mindset that, like, we're going to have free and fair elections if this
Nope.
continues. And, that's been one of the things that I've really been against the Democratic Party as it sits right now, because they voted to help with the SAVE Act.
Yeah.
The SAVE Act's going to kill free and fair elections.
Mm-hmm.
And, that is a huge issue right now, that we just do not have a real party that's in opposition.
No.
And, with Trump and them acting the way they are, part of the way you regain stability, like if you wanted to bring people back into the party of buying T-bills,
Yeah.
the way you do that is a way that I and some others had set out right after the election loss, which was the Democrats need to set up a shadow government,
Right.
essentially, that says we are the stable ones. We have the mandate of the Constitution. We're acting within the norms and bounds, and be unapologetic about it. But that means you actually can't work with the opposition then.
Yeah.
Get their plans enacted. And if the Democrats were to have done that, they would be in a much stronger position too if things come down to push versus shove, because you do need a Democratic Party and a government in exile that can make a claim to being the one in power.
Yeah. And they're starting to get that now. They're starting to get the idea that they should put some alternative messaging out there. They should run essentially a shadow government, but it's kind of terrifying who's talking about doing it. Yeah. These aren't necessarily the people that you really want out there putting those ideas out there.
No, they're some of the most dangerous voices in the party, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Right? Like anyone who's involved with the corporate alliance that's run the DNCC and the Democratic National Committee and the party at the national level, whether that's Reid Hoffman or whether that's, Ken fucking Martin or some of the others, like, these are not people who are going to do the best for the most. These are the people who are going to do the best for them.
Yeah.
And that is not how this can work if we want any chance to actually build a legitimate countervailing oppositional force.
Right. These people need to take a step back, and they need to take a look at what's going on in the streets right now.
Yeah.
They need to see that all of a sudden we've got protests happening where we've got millions of people coming out.
Yeah.
They estimate close to 5 million came out for the last weekend's hands-off protests. And it was staggering to look at those pictures, those numbers from everywhere. Small ass towns in the middle of nowhere are getting 30, 40 people out there protesting.
And that one is the part where people should be looking, is small town North and South Dakota, where they had people out in the streets. Small town rural Texas, where they
small
had
town
Idaho, Montana, where they had people in the streets. And it's really, when you start to actually talk about numbers.
Yep.
Like the largest anti-war protest of the anti-Vietnam era was April 17th, 1965, I want to say. And they're saying there were between 15 and 25,000 people in the street in DC that day. Let's just start talking numbers.
Yeah.
Saturday of last week in New York City alone, they estimated 150,000 people.
Yes.
That number keeps going up as the estimates continue to come in. DC was 20 or more thousand.
Easily.
Here in Minneapolis, there were 20,000 people at the state capitol. These numbers are already outside of the largest anti-war protests in the country's history.
Yeah.
What's really interesting, if we really want to get into the numbers, the largest protest ever held in the United States up until last Saturday was 15 years ago. No, sorry, it would have been like 20 years ago now, almost 25 years ago now, during the Iraq War
Yeah,
and
Iraq
the
War
lead
II.
up to it. And between 4 and 500,000 people showed up in DC or in New York City that day. But nationally, the numbers were lower.
Yeah.
There has been a sea change.
Mm-hmm.
And people want an option to do the right thing, and they want permission. And these protests are giving them permission.
Absolutely.
And they're giving people permission too for what's next and thinking about what could be and what might be the way we go forward. That's a lot of people to have thinking differently.
You can't shit on the concept of all of these normies that are out in the streets. If we are at a point now where we've got normal people that are pissed off enough to go out in the streets and protest, and it isn't the Democrats making them do it, then
well, that's just it. I mean, that's the part that drove me insane. Like I literally, mass movements are good for everyone involved except those they oppose, because it also gives you room to do other things.
Yeah.
Like a true diversity of tactics looks at a mass movement and says, okay, this is one part of a larger whole.
Yeah.
There are going to be other things that have to happen, and no mass movement can resolve an institutional convenience, right? Like, it's not going to be everyone Pokemon go to the fucking polls anymore.
No,
It's literally get out in the
past that.
street and do the thing. And if you put 5 million people in the streets once, that's one thing. And if it only happens once, that's a problem. But if you get 5 million, 6 million, 10 million in the streets a number of weekends in a row or over, a period, and those move, well, that gives your smaller movement cover to do whatever the fuck it wants.
Yeah.
And why wouldn't you look at it and say, look, there's a larger system of protesting now that gives us the ability to make that look less extreme than what we're doing, right? Like,
Exactly.
That's the part that blows me away. When you look at the 70s and the 60s, there was a thing that happened where these large, ostensibly nonviolent, but not truly nonviolent protests were going on. And there was violence going on from the police and from white supremacists and the whole system of the South.
Yes.
But then there was also the other part going on, which was there were radical elements going out and doing things. And when those things happen and you have a mass movement that ostensibly is nonviolent, or at least looks like it from the outside, well, look, people are going to start to look at these and say, whoa, one's more radical than the other, and people are going to move between them.
Yeah.
That's a good thing.
Mass
movements are crazy because they have all these different elements and people filter where they go. They might shift back and forth, and that's good. Ultimately, that gives you room to do a lot more, and it's mind-blowing to me.
And nobody's really in charge. And that's the best part of this, is that, like, the next leader is the next person who plans the next protest. No one's in charge.
Or the person who has a conversation that people latch onto in a venue where suddenly you get asked to do it again. It's not rocket science.
Nope. And the best part about this model is there's no one they can kill.
No, because
they can't Navalny anybody.
You can't kill an idea.
Yep.
And if it's all based on these ideas, well, guess what? You got a self-sustaining, decentralized protest movement that's got 1 million people in the streets. You've just become a world power.
And that's what I was thinking. Like, I mean, I read that thing about one guy blowing up a Tesla station is one guy. 1,000 people in the street that all of a sudden just sit down on command. You're right. That's a veiled threat.
Yeah.
If you can get them to sit down on command, what else can you get them to do?
Well, that's just it. There's an implied level of power in a cohesive movement that's scary as hell to people with actual power, because the reality is all of this is surrogate shit for ideas, right? So, like, if you have a movement where people are willing to listen and do what's asked, That is not even a veiled threat. That is
Yep.
an implicit threat that we also have the ability to go further if needed,
Mhm.
and people will follow.
They will.
If you have that as a structure, you've already done so much work against the power structure of the far right. It's mind blowing. And like, the arguments the last week have driven me to the point where I'm back just like trail running 5 miles a day.
Yeah. Because these aren't arguments I think we need to have.
No.
I think that like the gatekeeping is driving me crazy. That's the biggest like thing that I want to just hit my head against the wall. It's like, if your position is not perfect on all of these issues, you should not be allowed to protest. And it's like, fuck off, dude.
It's absolutely counterproductive to the goal of a mass movement to try and nitpick. There are terrible things that could be happening, but aren't. So there are some battles we have to pick and choose. And the fact that 5150 or 5051, whatever the name of this
5051, yeah.
Thank you. The fact that they have some serious issues in a couple of their venues needs to be addressed. But
it does.
You cannot take apart 5 million people based on terrible, shitty views of what appears to be one part of the larger movement. You definitely should criticize them. You should definitely have that conversation. We should definitely have the broader conversation. And I think there's something to be said about the racial makeup of the movement right now. But those are different arguments than you're not protesting right.
Right. Because we need those people. We need those people out in the streets. Yes, we do.
Yes.
We need every single one of them, because at some point we need to keep this as simple as possible. One or two demands.
That's just it. And I think the thing that was so interesting to me, so I drove from where I live to the state capitol last Saturday.
Okay.
Right after we had recorded on Friday, it was very apparent there were going to be large protests. And so I set out. It took me over an hour. I live maybe 15 minutes away. And I drove down University Avenue here in Minneapolis, and literally for 40 blocks, it was people walking with signs. It was people at the train station with signs. I've never seen anything like it except for the first 2 hours after George Floyd was murdered. And this was bigger. This was more organic in a lot of ways than anything I've ever seen, where it was just like people pouring into the streets.
Yeah.
And, the thing, I put up a thread about my getting to the protest last week, but the thing that still sits with me, like I still see it in my head. I drove by an elder care center, a residential elder care center. There were 50 people in wheelchairs with walkers, the whole deal, standing out front saying, we can't make it to the Capitol, but we're going to stand with you. That, you don't fuck with that movement.
Nope.
Because
that is a movement that has the mandate of heaven.
Yes. And that they do, in fact. And that's the thing. You have to learn to work with it. There are going to be a whole bunch of things where there's going to be conflict, sure. But like, you have to look at it as a multi-stepped movement.
Yeah. You can't just like crap all over that because you don't like their stance on cops or their stance on Palestine. I'm sorry, but not everybody has had the chance to get woke on some of these issues.
Well, and it's kind of on the movement to teach people, right? Like, that's the beauty of a mass movement, is if you go out and engage with the crowd, you know what happens?
Yeah.
You bring people over to your side.
People hear your ideas.
Exactly. And what was interesting is like, it's been a long time since I've been in a group of 25,000 people saying no to fascism in this country. Like, I don't actually think I've ever.
When did that happen before?
Yeah. Yeah. And so what was interesting though is it was a full-on normie crew,
right,
of 20 probably 1,000 people. Interspersed though in there were everyone from fully black blocked anarchists, handing out signs, having conversations, handing out snacks, doing what Black Bloc does best when you don't have to get into a fist fight, which is being kind of like riot parents, which is great.
Yeah.
But then you also had groups that were handing out really in-depth literature about what Project 2025 actually was as an authoritarian project, not just as like a ooh, Orange Man bad, but like this is how
Right.
authoritarianism works. This is how Project 2025 mimics it. That was being handed out by an organization I don't even know the name of, but you're
No.
not going to agree
No,
with
you're not.
everyone in the crowd. But if you go and engage, I bet you most people are now more amenable to the arguments that some of these groups that are kind of mad about this will make. Like,
Mhm.
I've never been in a crowd of normies that, like, if you had started really walking through even moderately radical anarchist theory, you would have pulled 3 in 10.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
These days you would.
bananas.
That's what they don't
Bananas.
understand. It's like you can either gatekeep this or you can start with the idea of let's talk about what mutual aid actually means. Let's not use that phrase, but let's talk about what mutual aid
Don't call
actually
it
means.
mutual aid. It's
Yeah.
fine.
And
The thing is, just make it not scary and you
yeah.
make it approachable and
Mhm.
don't gatekeep it. You know what happens? It becomes normal.
Uh-huh.
Because mutual aid, if you explain it from a social historical context, is the way we've survived as a country.
Yes.
So frame it that way. Have the conversation in a way that people will meet you at.
You've
You don't
heard
have to,
those
like,
stories about people doing barn raisings? Yeah.
yeah,
That's mutual aid.
yeah.
Maybe they didn't call it that.
You ever heard about how in places that were struck by disasters before FEMA was around, people would go in and help?
Yeah.
That's
That's
mutual
mutual
aid.
aid. This
What
is as
happened in
American as apple pie.
it literally is the way we survived for 200 of our 249 years.
Right. And now that we are going back to a point where some of these agencies that we've come to rely on in disaster situations aren't going to be reliable, aren't going to be around, these are concepts that we're going to need to get back and get familiar with.
Well, yeah. And that's the thing. Like, I actually, I've been thinking about that conversation about mutual aid for a minute here because and it actually came from a conversation you and I had last fall on an episode of Did Nothing Wrong, which is like when you have a natural disaster like a hurricane roll in to the Appalachians,
Right.
into the mountains, you and your neighbors aren't going to necessarily be able to help themselves
No.
fully. But if you bring people in who are and aren't neo-Nazis, you're actually helping in a way that is massive in a way that really can't be described. The reason mutual aid is increasingly important is because the people who have weaponized this now are literal Nazis.
Yeah.
And so if you don't want neo-Nazis doing mutual aid in communities that aren't radicalized,
And
with
they're going to do it. They
people,
do it. Patriot Front is handing out bottles of water at these things with Patriot Front stickers and literature and all the rest of it. You want to stop that? Get there first.
and have the conversation with 25,000 other normies if you can.
Yeah,
or in
absolutely.
the crowd of 25,000 other normies, because you know what? If 2 of them take it away out of the 100 you talk to, that's a larger front to
Right.
oppose fascism.
And that's, I think, what we need to just keep our eyes on is the idea that, like, there is one big goal here. And there's a lot of this stuff that can be worked out afterwards. I had somebody tell me today that they thought a popular front was a terrible idea because it always ends up punishing the left. And, there's something to that. But there's also the idea that the only thing that's ever slowed this down for any length of time, once the fascism really gets going, is a popular front. And
Right.
you have to slow them down long enough for their contradictions to catch up with them and make it possible to topple them. Especially these people. They're more Franco than Hitler.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
no, this is the Franco
mhm.
fascism, not the full-on Nazi fascism. It has the Nazi-esque qualities. They're
Sure.
definitely Nazis in the movement, but like this is more Franco than
Right.
Hitler.
I mean, the guy that wrote the book definitely is collaborating with Nazis, Jack Posobiec, come on down.
Yeah.
But part of what's
Ding,
going to
ding,
make
ding.
this work is the idea that everybody's got to have enough discipline to accept that certain issues are not going to be settled until the immediate threat has been
No.
neutralized.
And there's the other side of the list, which is immediate. There are immediate things that have to be settled, and namely
Mhm.
that is you can't work with fucking fascists,
Absolutely.
right? And what happened today, within the last hour of us starting recording, is Gretchen Whitmer. This photo of her with the file folders over her face in the White House is a disaster. It's over. It's over.
So much for that campaign.
Well, and that's just it. It's just, like I have people arguing in my comments right now that like this is the thing that sunk Kamala Harris. And it's like, yeah, siding with fascists does that. People
Yeah.
don't want that.
Yeah.
And people aren't getting this yet. That
Get
like,
it now. Get it out
Yeah.
now. I would much rather have Gretchen Whitmer completely disqualify herself in
Yes.
2025. I would rather
Yes.
have Gavin Newsom completely disqualify himself in 2025. Let's figure out who's suitable and who isn't.
Yeah.
Go do it now.
And it's, I think it's really tough for a lot of people within the Democratic Party and who have been in it forever, right?
Yeah.
This is a whole new world now where people aren't taking any kind of shit beyond do the right thing. And in this case, do the right thing means don't work at all with fascists. And
It's not that hard.
Unfortunately, that means the party is going to have to be broken down and rebuilt from the top down and the bottom up. Because when we have issues like Reid Hoffman,
Yeah.
and the other part of the techno-fascist side, deeply ingrained, not just people like, Newsom putting every fascist and fascist adjacent dude he can find on his podcast, but it's the whole structure, and that's the argument that has to be had, and that is one that has to be hashed out sooner than later. And like you said, it's good they're doing this in 2025, less than 3 months into Trump's term.
Keep going. Keep going. Anybody else want to go?
Well, we already have a pretty decent list, right?
Like, get it out of your system now.
Yeah. Well, get it out of your system now because you're going to be out of the system.
Yeah.
Like, people are done with this. And I think, it should scare the pants off of the Democratic Party funding system that people are actually holding the line here.
Yeah.
That,
I think it does. I think it terrifies them.
This.
Fucking with their cash is the only thing they understand.
Yeah, and it's going to make them fuck with us. I mean, and we're already starting to see it, right? Like, some of this is really reminiscent of the anti-Bernie stuff, but, like, this is just a mess.
Uh-huh. And, I mean, I'm good with a mess right now.
Oh.
This is when we got to have a mess.
I will be a dirty, dirty little pig over a fascist any day.
Yeah.
And that means I get to hang out in the fucking mud and run around the swamp in a cape. Fuck you.
Yeah. It's like I find myself looking at these situations and being like, I think it's awesome if Soros funded the Tesla protests. I think that's fucking hilarious if it
would be the funniest thing ever because he's less wealthy than the guy they're protesting.
I know. And I mean, it's not like they don't accuse everybody of being, Soros shills all the time, accuse us of cashing Soros checks. It'd be rad if he actually went and did it. I mean, the email address is griff@didnothingwrongpod.com. So George Soros, if you're listening and you actually do want to write some checks, hey,
we could actually use a small check.
We don't need much. I mean, budget's pretty low around here, believe me. But we don't. It's just hilarious that you have this circumstance where the most astroturfed people on the scene are the ones that are complaining the hardest about the possibility of a protest being astroturfed.
Well, and that's just, it's all the reality inversion, right? Like fascism thrives on that shit. And it's really, it's becoming so much more just stark that these people literally say the thing they're doing as an accusation, right? And like, it's always been kind of the joke, but it's true. And it's an intrinsic part of the fascist will to power shit that they're doing, which is literally like, we will accuse you of what we are doing every time, and it works. Yeah. And that's a problem. That's a problem, right? Like,
I'm going to deposit my check from Viktor Orban, and then I'm going to criticize you for being un-American. It's amazing. Like, how do you sleep?
Oh, pretty well, considering they're also sleeping on, as many dead bodies
A
as they can
bed of
shovel underneath.
$100 bills. That's how I
Yeah,
sleep.
$100 bills
my
and dead
side.
bodies are a good
Fucking-
bed frame.
Apparently so. Apparently so. Never tried it, but it seems to work for them.
I would like to not be anywhere near that house.
Yeah. And it's frustrating, but at the same time, it's almost like hysterically funny to think that like that's actually going to slow anyone down. The idea that, oh wow, man, some of these people actually are also parts of groups that are pretty organized. You can look at this thing and it's obviously not the Democrats that are doing it.
Oh God, no! The
If
Democrats are scared shitless of this because it might mean they have to change course, right?
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
it's not. This is something totally different, and I think people want there to be a simple answer, which is why guys like Musk lie about Soros being involved, right? It's the core ethos of this shit. The reality is, like, the right wing has had to fund every one of their protests, including the Tea Party, to the tune of billions of dollars for 20 years, because there's really no popular support for it unless they manufacture it. So they assume that everyone works in that power model, when the reality is, this is the classic fight that's been going on in the post Enlightenment world for 300 years.
Yep.
And it's landed white wealth versus the rest of us.
Yeah.
And it's the Republican Party really, has tried to obscure that up until Trump won the first time around. And they tried to obscure it a little bit. Now this time, this is just naked, unvarnished fascism with capital, with American capital flavoring.
Yeah.
And it's not new.
No.
Like, this is just the way America has functioned up until the Second World War. This was pretty much the norm.
Right.
And so, like, understanding that means also, like, really looking at their bullshit and saying, well, this is comical. Like, if I was writing a script, if someone was writing a movie script, and you wrote your villains to literally do Bond villain shit like this, people are going to tell you can't make the movie.
Yeah, no one would believe it.
No.
It's not credible.
Now we understand, or at least I understand a little bit better, why a guy like Ian Fleming, who was in the OSS and dealt with actual Nazis, wrote Bond villains the way he did. Because it seems to be a feature of this, and it has been historically, where they literally accuse the other side of what they're doing, for one, but then make these grandiose claims and threats in the assumption that the other side is just going to be like, oh my God, what do we do? And sometimes they are, and sometimes they're also just like, what?
Yeah.
Did you just say? Because this seems absolutely out of this world.
And paralyzing the opposition is a goal for them. Getting the opposition to sit there and be like slack-jawed about this whole thing is definitely a goal for them. They absolutely want to make sure that any responses that they might get are muted and weird and, easy for them to dunk on.
Absolutely. And something where it's going to be institutional, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think the thing that is really tough for a lot of people is to understand that, like, the American fascist movement and the transnational fascist movement really does see power through the Schmidt, the Carl Schmitt lens. And
what are you bad enough to do? What are you bad enough to take?
Exactly. And really, looking at it and saying, well, this is a construct.
Yeah.
And like, that's the thing, when people talk abstractly about power acquisition and fascism, and the reality is, like, one of the superpowers, and I hate using that fucking word, the air quotes that are necessary, the superpower of fascism is really being able to look at a systemic creation like democracy and say, look, there are internal norms, there are contradictions. Well, it's also just a construct, and if we don't agree to certain parts of it, it stops working. So who gives a shit?
Yeah.
And it's been tough because that conversation is a much larger conversation that literally, if we were going to really dive into it, that's a month of us talking once a week for 2 hours to really get into the whole history and the bits and pieces of all of this that have been sprinkled through American history. But the reality is, one of the powers of fascism is that it understands that the actual way to gain and maintain power is to steamroll institutional, construction. And
Yeah.
if they can do that, you've changed material reality in a way that is going to affect people materially, maybe not immediately, but in huge ways eventually.
Yep.
And fascism's built on that upheaval, and then being able to say, look, it's this person who did it, or it's this group that did it, and reconstitute something new from those destroyed pieces.
Yeah. And I
And
don't think people realized just how fast, I mean, it even shocked me just how fast and how thorough these people were going to be about what they're doing. It's impressive that they've really
I mean,
thought out,
it's
like, where did we screw up the first term? Well, we're not going to make that mistake again.
well, and that was always the fear with Project 2025, right? Is like that was a demolition manual
Yeah.
for certain crucial parts of the institutional democracy we all know.
Yep.
But more importantly, the supports they went for immediately are broader social systems that we've just assumed were kind of natural phenomena because
Right.
they ran so silently and so cleanly behind everything. And the far right literally walked in and said, well, those are the structural supports for democracy
Yep.
and the sense making that's crucial to it, and how we think it through and how we understand each other, our past,
Yeah.
all of this. And they just walked in and hit it with depth charts.
Like, I thought they were going to put Chris Rufo in charge of the Department of Education. I didn't think they were just going to take the Department of Education and kill it.
I mean, it's unbelievable, right? Like they
Yeah.
said that this was their goal with all of these things they've done.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's the Bond villain phenomenon.
Yeah.
Who the hell would believe that when someone, when a fascist tells you they're going to do something, they're going to do it?
Yeah. And it's ridiculous because you think there would have been more pushback. You think that the various powers that be would have showed more spine, more,
Well,
no, we're not letting you do this. But no. How many of his nominees got unanimous consent in the Senate? We're not forgetting that.
Oh, no. And that's just it. How many? I mean, look at what happened, just recently. They had 55, they had 55 people vote for another confirmee. Then they had multiple members vote for the SAVE Act, which will disenfranchise 71 million women
Yeah.
the day it's implemented, and stop free and fair elections from ever happening again as long as these people hold any semblance of power.
Yeah.
And we're not going to forget. And we're definitely not going to forgive these people for putting it in a position where now they've done what has happened with other systemic and existential risks based on capital or the way that we do consumerism, which is to turn it into the individual's problem to solve, which means it can't be solved.
Yeah.
And that's why these protests are so important, because the one way individuals do actually have to solve these things is to come together, find community, build resilient communities, and then go take what's ours. It's how it's worked since the Enlightenment.
And people feel it in their guts right now. People feel that there's something wrong, and that they're not hearing anything from the major parties that are, it's anything that they'll feel better about.
Not a damn thing.
That's the thing that I think a lot of people, and again, we talked a little about, like, the idea of gatekeeping. These people are normies. And that's what people don't realize, is that, like, these are the people that didn't do this kind of stuff up until now.
Yeah.
This is their moment that they've decided to pick. They're crying out for, like, how do we do something effective? How do we do something to fix this situation? And I think, this is where we can make so much headway by being able to take those people and say, hey, welcome to the fight. Here's what's going on. Here's what they're doing. Here's why. Here's the theory behind what they're actually doing. You understand that Elon's an authoritarian. What else? How many other of these guys are there around the world? This is why Palestine's important. This is why you have to be able to look and say, this is what they do here. This is what they do here. This is what they do here. It's got to stop everywhere.
Well, exactly. And I mean, it's, this is the tough one because, quote, anti-fascism
Mhm.
has been turned into 1,000 different things, when the reality is one of the real things that anti-fascism looks at and treats is the systemic risk that fascism poses and is.
Mhm.
And when a lot, for a lot of people, they think of anti-fascism as being like guys throwing fucking Molotovs.
Mhm.
Not the case generally. I mean, yes, it happens, and yes,
Diversity of
Greece,
tactics.
Greece, go get some. Please keep doing what you're doing. France, keep doing what you're doing. But like in the U.S., we haven't even done the hard work of teaching people why fascism's bad.
Yeah.
We've told people it's bad. We've told people it's evil. We've done that, but the actual hard work starts with a mass movement like this that is normie driven. So you can walk in and start saying, look, it's a systemic problem. It has ties to most of American history. It's not just an American phenomena, but the American variety has these flavors. And
Yes.
that's the way you actually get people into it. And from there, it's really, I wouldn't say easy, but to get people from that place, once they get educated on why it's bad, not just
Yeah.
that it is, um, you get immediately to really interesting places like collectivism. Why
Yeah.
that's important? Well, that's a huge avenue for 100 different groups to work from.
Right.
You
Right.
have, you know, one of the biggest things for the Democratic Party that they have to get past is this urge to demonize and abandon people who are ostensibly already under authoritarian regimes in red states. They're going to
Yeah.
need those people. They're good people. They deserve
It's
the
not their
help.
fault there aren't enough people who have been educated in places like that to
Exactly.
understand why it's such a bad idea to keep
It's
voting for some of these policies over and over. They're
it's
not
also not
bad people.
Yeah, it's also not. It doesn't make you a bad person to live in a place that's already been under authoritarian rule for
Mhm.
20 years, and the democratic system's been destroyed there, which is the reality of a lot of these red states that have been longtime red states. They are not free and fair democracies. They
No.
haven't been for decades, if at
No.
all.
I mean, look at what
And
North Carolina's doing now. Look at how they just went back and like they're going to
exactly.
invalidate a bunch of votes and they're going to just, I mean, specific votes and
Yep.
specifically Democratic
Yes.
precincts, and they're going to flip an election after the fact.
After the fact.
Is that
Yes.
democracy?
No.
Fuck no,
And
that's
that's the
not
model.
democracy.
And that's the model, right?
Uh-huh.
And it's one that we've talked about before. You can't fault the voters who have tried and can't break an authoritarian systemic issue.
Yeah.
Because it takes more than that. And we know that because people like Lyndon Baines Johnson had to roll the fucking military into the South to make sure that kids could go to school.
Mm-hmm.
So
because the governors of these states would stand on the steps of the schoolhouse and say, we're not letting black kids come in here.
exactly, what are you going to do about it? They force the
At
hand.
some point, you got to do something about it.
Exactly.
And to put that on the average citizen, the average person who's trying to get by, that like, yeah, this is going to take a military response to get these people. Whose fault is that?
Yeah.
It's our fault for letting it go this long.
Thank you.
Thank
That's
you.
just it.
At
right?
some point,
Like, and,
we should have rubbed their nose in it, 100 years ago.
and that's the hardest part, right? Is because it's systemic failure, people feel responsible at the governmental level, and they are.
Yeah.
So you have to work from that position and say, look, they fucked up. We have to move forward now, though, and do it.
And we have to move forward with as many people as we can. I just can't emphasize this enough. We have such a rare opportunity right now with this energy that's in the country. And again, I don't think this is going to abate by itself because the economy is not looking good. We have a system that is on the verge of collapse in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And that's going to drive people out into the streets. The weather's getting better. It's not getting worse. It's going to get real hot this summer. And we have a real golden opportunity to make some structural change now.
Well,
make some systemic change.
And build new structures, right?
Yes.
Like new structures of thought of practice of execution
Right.
politically don't just magically
No.
appear in power. They have to be built. And we have to be the ones to build them. The fact that Obama came out last weekend after the protests
Yeah.
and said, no one's coming to save you except each other,
Yeah.
that should tell people exactly where this is at. You're never going to have an ex-president
Yeah.
get much clearer than that.
Especially
And
not him.
No, definitely not him. And, the thing is, like, you don't need leaders. You don't need a leadership organization. We don't need a fucking DNCC for this. What we
Nope.
need is for people to understand and move from the position of knowing that the system itself broke.
Yeah.
And it broke under the weight of specific factors: wealth inequality, racial inequality, and an inability to say, look, this is wrong. And if we don't do something about it, we're going to be destroyed.
Yeah.
Because they were scared of the response from very specific people that we've now seen can't win Democrats' elections, namely moderate Republicans
Yep.
and Republican namesakes aren't going to win the Democratic Party elections.
No.
Unfortunately, they have decided that is the tack. And that has to be put to bed, or they will never hold power again, and we will be doing this for a long time.
Right. They need to understand that these people don't have the base. These people don't have the constituency that maybe you thought they did.
No.
It is not worth trying to cultivate a Liz Cheney. It is not worth trying to cultivate a Adam Kinzinger. Maybe these people are going to come along, but we shouldn't move 1 inch in their direction. Sorry.
No.
Not 1 inch, because
this is where then the argument from the party becomes purity shit and the bullshit around that, which is just that. It's BS, and it's made to slow down, quote unquote, change, quote unquote, within the party. And, you and I and Jared Yates Sexton have had this conversation on this show a couple times now. The recuperative effort of neoliberalism is what brought us fascism, so we have to destroy the neoliberal recuperation machine. And that means it's going to come from us coming together.
Yeah.
It's going to come from us saying we're not going to abandon a goddamn person just because it's easier for you to make political hay. And we're definitely not going to push away the grief of what's been done to us and to everyone else because you were unwilling to do the right thing at the time because it wasn't polling well in your fucking research group.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's the thing. All of this, a lot of people want there to be this like 2020 confrontation again right away. Everyone who is involved with that is burned out to the ground from that action alone. That's not to say that it won't happen, but the other part of that is you do not want the immediate thing to be an all-out ground war in a couple of different cities. What you want is mass movement. And if it comes to that, it comes to that. But then you have the backing of the population to continue that fight that couldn't be continued in 2020 in places like Minneapolis or Portland because they got disrupted.
Right.
And
absolutely.
That's the reality, right? Like if you're going to have waves of this where we have mass normie movements. Then there are going to be other things. Then there's going to be another mass movement from the normies. There's going to be another movement that isn't normies and is more radical. And you're going to have to get used to that because that's how this works. It's not an either and, it's everything in due time.
These things are messy. These things are messy and complicated, and not everybody's going to get what they want out of this situation. But if we keep it going, we have a shot to stop this thing. We have a real shot to stop this thing, especially right now.
Yes.
Because it isn't as sunk in that the situation is hopeless. They haven't been able to convince people of that yet.
And it's not solidified. Their power isn't solidified.
Right.
Like, that's the thing. Like, as the economy gets worse, for example,
Mhm.
if we continue having mass movements, even though people are broke, even though it's ostensibly worse on the ground than it's ever been in a lot of people's lifetimes, well, that means people have nothing to lose, and that scares the hell out of people with power. Because
Yeah.
if you start pushing against a group that increasingly is is unburdened by much of the things that we've been burdened by,
Yeah.
you've got yourself a real problem. And you also have a society that will start to, in that process, has already started to coalesce around itself, not a leadership class.
Yes. You're teaching people things you probably didn't want them to know with the
Yeah.
way you're behaving at this point. So I think, like I said, this is where you look at the idea of people, especially in power, have to look and see which way the wind's blowing and
Yeah.
realize that the people sometimes are the ones that are going to show you which direction this thing needs to go in.
Well, and I think that's the
Sorry if
toughest.
that sounds Maoist, but here we are.
No, I think that's right though. Like, and it's really interesting when you look through American history and you even look through European history. The protests are what led the hand.
Yeah.
And I don't like that. I don't like that we have to, as a population, rise up and take the hand of those who are in power and say, look, if you keep going down this road, we are going to walk with you right up until we push you off a cliff.
Right.
But it's the way it works.
Yes.
Politics, top-down politics, in a democratic country, the change doesn't come from the top. It comes
No.
from millions of people and thousands of others who have been hurt or died in the fight to do the right thing. I mean, look at labor rights in this country.
Yeah.
The U.S. waged a war against labor, and I don't mean that hyperbolically.
No.
I mean the first time the Americans ever dropped airborne ammunition was on striking coal miners.
Yeah. Go look up
And-
Spokane free speech fight sometime.
Yeah, go look up the Battle of Blair Mountain.
And why are there literally like so many examples of this you can look up if it wasn't a war?
Exactly. And like, I think it's tough because the sanitized version of history that most people have taken in, it was sanitized for this reason, because the population is the one who leads the hand.
Mm-hmm.
And business has always tried to actually take the hand. And we saw that, 110 years ago in this country was the era of true anarchists and socialists doing direct action at a scale that we've never seen since. Part of the reason we've never seen it since is because it got things done.
And you know what? That is really interesting because earlier this week, I got to the Museum of Washington State History, which is located in Tacoma, Washington.
Yeah.
And if you've ever been to, if you're ever in that area, you should really check it out. It's wonderful. They had an exhibit about the Depression and about the way things worked around here in the Seattle area during the Depression. And I'm going to read some of this from the plaque. It was called The Republic of the Penniless. And at the onset of the Depression, government offered no relief to the destitute. Explained President Hoover, it is not the function of the government to relieve individuals of their responsibilities to their neighbors. In Seattle, longtime radicals took that responsibility, forming one of the nation's first unemployed citizens leagues. These urban cooperatives created a system of barter and cooperative labor that restored pride to the jobless while meeting their needs. Members, most of whom had homes and families, donated 2 days' work a week. They exchanged services from shoemaking to auto repair to drawer making to dressmaking to carpentry. They cleaned, distributed thousands of cords of firewood and tons of fish, potatoes, and fruit. And by 1934, Seattle's 20 UCL chapters had over 40,000 members and political power. In response, the city created a $1 million relief fund. What
There we
happened?
go.
The
There, I
people
mean,
got together
yeah,
and realized we can do this. We can do
yeah,
this ourselves because, like you said, no one's coming.
yeah,
The president has said it ain't our problem, dude.
yeah, yeah.
So what happened?
It's
The
really
people got
interesting.
together.
It's one of those things. This is how it works. We come together
Hmm.
and force the hand of power. And last week at the protests, one of the things that stood out to me, and I got a photo of it. We'll put it up in
Yes.
the notes section. But it was a group of people standing on top of the Floyd Olson statue on the Capitol grounds, and it was someone holding a sign that says "We will not capitulate with fascism," and someone else flying an Irish flag. And the reason it's interesting, not just because of the interesting protest happening, is because they understood the thing that other people don't, but that plaque it's explained on your end, which was Floyd B. Olson literally became governor because he brought a case against what was called the Minnesota Citizens Alliance,
Right.
which was a conservative business organization that was dedicated to preserving right to work laws. But the thing was, they also hired hitmen to blow up the house of a union leader.
Uh-huh.
And he went after them and won.
Hmm.
But he then basically was asked by the people who had what was then the Minnesota Farmer Labor Party, which was the MFLP, and
Right.
that turned into what is today the Democratic Farmers League, which is
Right.
the DFL here. And what was really interesting was just how from that era, both in Minnesota and in other places, we saw the actual thing that happened, which was, Olson won and he took this thing on, but he took it on because he won by taking organized labor in, coalition of farmers, small businesses that were
Yep.
family run, and he brought them in 1930, I believe. And it was a few years after the stock market crashed and all
Okay.
this, but he literally won 59% of the vote because he understood the people guided the hand.
Yeah.
And that's just it. Like we have these moments where truly we as individuals coming together as a group of like-minded and not always in agreement, but
Hmm.
like-minded, conscientious objectors to what's happening, get things done.
And
And
before you dismiss this out of hand,
yep,
part of the reason why Trump is in power is because he was able to read those currents on the right.
yes,
And he was able to realize that the people wanted red meat, that they had
yep,
been conditioned by Rush Limbaugh, by Fox News, by Bill O'Reilly, by all of these people
yeah.
to want red meat. And the idea of Paul Ryan coming out and saying marginal tax rates just wasn't fucking exciting anyone.
Well, and
Trump
that's
gave them red meat.
exactly. And that's the thing, right? Like Paul Ryan's actually interesting in my mind because he is the neocon equivalent of the current Democratic Party in that all his response was technocratic
That's on
governance.
point. That's so on point.
And technocratic governance doesn't do a goddamn thing for anyone on the ground in a real material appreciable way that they can tell. It may help them, but it doesn't do shit to make them feel like they were helped.
Yeah.
And the reality is, Trump tapped into a vibes economy that told people they hadn't been helped because neither party has helped anyone in a long time in material ways that are positive. And
Yeah.
Trump rode that in. The Democrats still haven't been disabused of this notion that they can get out of this by heavier technocratic governance and larger investments with billionaires.
No.
And the Liberal Party has to be disabused of this notion. And it's going to be gross. It's going to be scary for a lot of people who think they've had power. But you know what? Shit happens. You made a
Yes.
bed. Now you're going to lie in it. And the rest of us are going to do what we do best, which is clean up the messes of the government. And that sucks. But it's also how we build something that actually represents us, both as individuals and a larger group, more honestly.
Right.
And, that's democracy. We don't have it right now in this country. We are not a democracy right now. So we have to do the hard work of rebuilding one, and it has to represent everyone, not just the technocratic governance class of neocons, neoliberals, and libertarians, because fuck all three of them, right?
Yeah.
Especially the libertarians.
But if we play our cards right, we might be able to get there sooner than we think.
We have much more kindling to do this on a social level than we've had in most people who are alive right now's life.
Yep. So let's not blow it.
No, we can ride this into the sunset if we want to.
Mm-hmm. And I think we'd all like that at this point.
I think everyone would greatly enjoy that, frankly.
Yeah.
Except for some people, but you know what? It's kind of that's the beauty of riding off into the sunset, because fuck those people.
Exactly. You're in the sunset. You don't care.
Bye.